Good afternoon. My name is Tu Clark, and I'm with the Office of Environmental Management. Today's webinar will focus on the Army Corps of Engineers permitting processes and expectations for applications. We have Army Corps of Engineers staff here today to present this information. But before we get started, there are just a couple of housekeeping items. You all are currently on mute. If you have any questions that you would like to ask the panelists, please use the questions box on your go-to toolbox. We will be answering questions towards the end of the session. With that, I will pass this on to Andy Kozlowskis, who is the Chief of Permitting in the Panama City office. Andy?
Thank you, Tu. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We really appreciate the opportunity to present information to you that can help streamline the permitting process and basically get your linear transportation permits to you quicker. This was a good team effort. You're going to be hearing from each of our FDOT liaisons, each of our funded positions, and we're proud to present you this information. If we could get to the first slide, please. Just to recap of how we're organized, I sit in the Panama City office, which is actually now on Panama City Beach, and Cynthia Obdank and Sue Maxwell both sit in this office. And then we've got Randy Turner in our Jacksonville district office, and then Mark Tamblin is in our Palm Beach Gardens office. These folks being distributed across the state help us to get closer to the work and closer to y'all as coordinators and agents. So that's why we're structured that way. And we've had a great communicative relationship with central office and worked on several initiatives like utilizing the SharePoint site, increasing communication through weekly huddle meetings with coordinators, and most recently, we're very excited after about a year of negotiating. We are adding another position to assist with the workload. This is going to be a GS11 position, project manager position, located in Panama City, but this person will be permitting projects throughout the state, mostly nationwide and regional general permits. So that's just a quick update for me. Thanks again for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to my team here. We'll start with Cynthia.
Cynthia, please be sure to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Sorry.
Perfect, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The toolbox is showing me it's still muted, but you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for technical difficulties, everyone. Again, my name is Cynthia Obdank. I work with the Corps of Engineers as part of the FDOT team. As the map shows you that Andy discussed, I work permit applications for District 1, District 3, and Turnpike. And my portion of the presentation is going to be complete applications and recommended information to expedite review. So this first slide is just as a reminder that we now have separate applications. We no longer do the joint application with the state. The source book site shown down here is a place that you can go and get this application. One thing too, did you mention that about the recording of this webinar?
No, I'm sorry, but yes, this webinar is going to be recorded and made available to everyone after this session is over.
Okay, thank you. So this link and whatever will be available through the recording of this webinar. Going to discuss the application forms, again, is the ING 4345 that you can get from our source book. And very important, so I'm going to go through some information to make sure that you have everything right on your first submittal of the application. One of the main things is the signature on the application in block 27 for the authorized agent. So if you have an authorized agent, you need to make sure that this block is signed, given permission for the Corps to communicate with your agent, because otherwise we cannot have discussions and share information with an agent. So in general, this is what's needed for a complete application, in particular for nationwide permits and or GPs. The name, address, and telephone numbers, including your email addresses. That's very important. Location of the activity. Identify what kind of permit you're requesting, whether it's a nationwide permit or a general permit, or in some cases a standard permit. Please give a good description of the proposed activities, which include direct, indirect impacts, along with quantities, and mitigative actions, including avoidance and minimization. There is a block in the first page, I believe, of the application, or the second, where it says avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. So you should put a brief description there of mitigation. That generally gets left out. And most of the time it's included somewhere within a narrative or an environmental supplement, but we need to have something right there in that application, in that section, especially concerning mitigation, but avoidance and minimization as well. The delineation of the waters of the United States, we need to have, and it has to be used with federal methodology, the 1987 manual and regional supplement. We need to have the data sheets mapped with data points and appropriate drawings. And for compensatory mitigation, make sure you let us know on the data sheets what functional analysis you're using, whether it's UMAM or RAP or another form. The data sheets should have a score summary. We need to have some discussion on federally listed species for the Endangered Species Act. If it's federally funded project, then FDOT can be lead agency and they do the consultation or concurrence, but we need to have discussion in the application for that. Same thing with historic properties. If there's any national wild and scenic river systems or other similar waterways, please include this on the application. And also, if there's going to be any kind of effect on a federal project under Section 408, we need to have something in there discussing that. We'll have sections as part of this presentation later, which is going to discuss more in detail the Section 408, so for any effects that it may have on a federal project. The nationwide permits complete application, you can locate this information. It's outlined in General Condition 32B of 2017 nationwide permits, again on the source book under permitting and nationwide permits. Also, be sure to read and comply with the regional conditions associated with pre-construction notifications, which is available at the same location. The regional conditions generally are going to be much more restrictive, and they have conditions in there usually dealing with endangered species or Section 408 or historical resources. The other types of permits, the regional general permits, letter of permission, or standard permits is defined in 33 CFR 325.1D. And please be aware, a complete application does not always mean that we have enough information to make a final decision, especially for the letter of permission or standard permits. Common deficiencies that we find within the applications are that we don't have a project description or we have a poor project description. Please give us detailed information for this. We don't get latitude, longitude, or not in decimal degrees. FDOT's pretty good. They usually do get us the latitude, longitude, but make sure we get them in decimal degrees. No adjacent property owners for LOP or SP. Remember, we don't need this if you're applying for a nationwide or a general permit. So don't go through the trouble of putting the adjacent property owners in the application for nationwide or general permits. Application, as I've already said, not appropriately signed. No existing habitat description, which can include seagrass surveys, ecological communities, vegetation, wetland delineations. The wetland delineations don't include data sheets, map of data points, or appropriate drawings depicting the delineation. This is a common deficiency that I personally see. Is no data sheets and no data points. No drawings, poor quality drawings, or poorly compiled drawings. I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. Lack of avoidance and minimization statements. And that can be, if it went through a PD&E study, or just or the use of best management practices, just something explaining, in a couple of sentences, how you avoided and minimized impacts to aquatic resources. I already discussed the lack of compensatory mitigation statement. A lack of alternative analysis. This is only needed for standard permits. And as part of that submittal, you can put in there the process that was the project has went through in the PD&E study. Just provide those details. This one is common too, that there's ESA and SHPO coordination consultation. The PD&E study or the NEPA delegation can include this, but we need to have this in our application. Otherwise, you're going to see this every time in the first RAI, because we have to respond to this and be able to make determinations. And if FDOT is the lead agency and they've done the coordination and/or consultation, we still have to have this information. So please provide us that in the application. And previous core permits. If the project has had a core permit, please include that number so we're not duplicating permit numbers and missing information that was gathered during the process of the first permit. This is just showing a picture of a general site location map. We need to see, where it's at in the big overall scale, the zoomed out picture, but we also need to be able to pinpoint where it's at. So you see in the bottom of this that shows the overall zoomed out, and then in the top one, it's got a more detailed, tells us exactly where it's at. Make sure that your map includes these things listed on the left side over here, particularly the scale, north arrow, citations of where the aerial or project drawing came from, section, township, and range, and the city and county. This is an example of a drawing that we would like to see for existing site conditions. Albeit this is not a linear project, but this is just showing in general a drawing. So this has the flux. This shows where the delineation points are. It's got a nice legend table over here. Clear depiction lines. It's got the scale with an accurate legend. Another drawing that's similar, just showing what we would like to see in existing site conditions. We want to see where the wetlands are. We want to see what kind of wetland it is through the flux code. And we want to see the quantities, how large. So as this is listed over here through the different hatching and such, that is what we would like to see there. This is an actual linear project. This is a good one. Sorry, I didn't orient that one right. But this one shows the direct impacts. It shows secondary impacts. It's overlain on an aerial. It has the flux codes with distinct boundaries and a legend. This is something else that's very nice to have. This one shows, again, the indirect secondary impacts, and it's paired with a wetland summary table. It shows the different flux codes with the impacts, the quantity that's existing, and potentially the impacts and the wetland ID number. This one is a nice map for a soils map. It shows all of the soils. They're identified through the legend and the labels. I personally really love when you can show the wetlands or waters in blue or green, something that's usually associated with water. This is an example of an index inset sheet for linear projects. So this is something that is particularly important for linear projects because we need to be able to see where the project is. So when we see those drawings that has just the one little section showing wetland impacts are in this area, we need to see where it's at in the overall project. So providing something like this and then showing the match lines and such on the associated drawings is very, very helpful. This is a linear project. This is a very good one that shows it's got clear hatching for where the wetland impacts are. You can read the text, and it's got this nice cross section down in the bottom here. So it makes it easy to kind of look at and understand what the project is. This is another example. I like this one a lot. This one shows, as you can see up here with the blue, this indicates secondary impacts. The hatching is wetland impacts, which is direct impacts. It's got areas that show the row, the existing row. If there's proposed expansion of the row, please include that in the drawings. It shows the locations of the culverts and other areas which might not be considered a direct impact in some cases. And of course, the sidewalks or bike lanes or whatever that's included. This is an example of an unclear project drawing. This is kind of common. If possible, please ask your GIS guys to take out the stuff from these engineer drawings that the Corps does not need to see. We don't need to see where the sign is going to be located or where the plants are or et cetera. Just try to take out the stuff that is not pertinent to the Corps' review for impacts to aquatic resources. This is our jurisdictional form, and I put this in here. I don't know if you can read this or not, probably not, but it will be on there in the recording for your review. The areas that I highlighted, so I see this as this one filled out incorrectly pretty often. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that under Section 2, reason for request, under that third and fourth box, that's generally going to be one of the boxes that FDOT and or Turnpike would check in their request for JD. The third box says that the jurisdictional determination will be used to avoid and minimize impacts, and its initial step for a future permitting process. So this would be used if it was pre-application and you're only asking for a JD. Number 4 should be the one that is most commonly checked, and that states that the JD, the jurisdictional request, is accompanied by a permit application. On this next page of the forms in Section 3, the type of request. This is also where, and I understand it's kind of difficult. You're not really sure which one to put. But in general, the fourth box is going to be where it should be checked most of the time. And that one is the section that says preliminary jurisdictional determination. You're requesting that with submittal of a pre-construction notice or Department of the Army permit application. And for those that's not aware, first of all, PCN stands for pre-construction notification, and a permit application is considered a pre-construction notification. I put this in there, that's the next page of this form, but I wanted y'all to be aware that this tells you the recommended information that we need for a jurisdictional determination. It's very specific on this information. You can go through this later when you view the recorded webinar, but it has very specific stuff in there that we need, and a lot of times we do not get this. And this is also the same thing, especially this table here. If you review that, it will give you other information, and up here as well, about what is best to put on your jurisdictional determinations and wetland information. This is a checklist. This is not a formal checklist. This is nothing that's going to be in our source book. This is just a personal checklist that I have made. Anything on here that started with asterisk is a requirement for a complete application, and I've already went through several of these. Directions to the site, please give us that. Project purpose and need, we always need that. That's a requirement for complete application. And blocks 20 through 23 of the application, dredge and or discharge of fill. Please be aware that all materials, dirt, concrete, culverts, etc., are considered, most of the time, are considered a form of fill. So don't ever put NA there. I've seen this several times on applications. If it's not applicable, then you therefore don't need a permit. You're not requesting a permit from us because you have to have dredge and or discharge of fill for to need any authorization from us. We've already went through that, the avoidance minimization and mitigation, and following the manual. Please let us know. This is one I have to ask every time. Is it federally or state funded? That tells us quickly, do we need to go ahead and start the consultation and coordination process with Fish and Wildlife Service, with SHPO, with NIMS? So we need to know this as soon as possible, because sometimes that can be the lengthiest part of the review process. Also, please include the FPN number or the ETDM number. Please let us know that kind of information as well. Project plans, again, the asterisk is required for complete application. We want it on an aerial overlay. We got to be able to put boots on the ground, and we got to be able to know, looking at the plans that you send us, where we are at when we're on the ground trying to find where's the wetland impact. And the best way to show that is with an aerial overlay. We want to see on the aerial overlay where the wetlands are, where the other surface waters are. It'd be nice if it had the NHD flow lines, and if it had the names for the water crossings, if they are a named water crossing. Again, if you have an overall project plan with the index sheet, that would be nice, and associated specific section sheet plan with all of these things on it that we've already discussed. A typical cross section for each general aspect of the project, as I showed in those examples of drawings, is actually almost a requirement for us. Otherwise, we can't tell what's going on in the project. Wetland or other surface water summary table for each wetland. Please include in that the total acreage, the total direct and secondary impacts. And the other thing that would be nice, because and reduce the time for review, is if you didn't combine state versus federal jurisdictional waters. because that takes additional time if we have to go through and try to weed out, what is the core jurisdictional areas. So please, if you can, separate them in a summary table, and always make sure to include the wetland IDs and get an overall as well. The environmental supplement is practically a must on all of our applications, because we got so many other things we're looking at. So please describe the existing discussion with flux codes descriptions, wetland descriptions, the wetland summary table we just talked about. Project proposal discussion, please have a discussion in there, not just a map, but a discussion of the direct, secondary, and temporary impacts to waters of the United States. Again, separate the state and the federal impacts. Please include the jurisdictional determination with the JD request form, and the basic information is not required for a complete application, but for the PJD form, preliminary jurisdictional form, that would help expedite the review. Include your methodology of how you determine the wetlands are jurisdictional or not for the Corps. Please photo document your data points. We've already discussed avoidance and minimization and a complete mitigation proposal, including functional analysis. Please make sure that mitigation proposal is complete. So, what are you proposing for mitigation? Or if you're not proposing mitigation, tell us why, please. Please include in that discussion on the ESA determination, communications commitments, concurrence, or a biological opinion or a biological assessment. Same thing with essential fishery habitat, EFH. Please provide us copies of any of this that you may have had prior to submitting your application. Same thing with SHPO and with tribal communications. Please provide us that information. With that said, I am done with my part of this presentation, and I thank you, and I'm going to turn it over now for further discussion of nationwide permits to Randy Turner.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be covering the first level to consider when seeking Department of the Army authorization for minimal impacts to waters of the U.S. or to the aquatic environment. Next slide, please. Here are the objectives we'll be covering today. And the main thing is to make sure you have the right tools in your toolboxes and also know where to find them. And I can't highlight enough the link at the bottom of the slide. If you go to that link, everything you want to know about the regulatory program is in the source book. It's user friendly and contains a lot of information. Next slide, please. A nationwide permit, just as the title indicates, it's nationwide across the United States, the whole country, including Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It's for activities with minimal impacts on the aquatic environment. Headquarters USACE issues every 5 years and for only 5 years, and this is because it's reevaluated for impacts on the aquatic environment. They use the Corps' ORM database for each nationwide permit to see if it's in line with the intent of the nationwide permit program. Adjustments may or may not be made, or a nationwide permit could be rescinded, or I will mention that litigation could also limit a nationwide permit or temporarily rescind it. The most recent version is the March 19th, 2017. That's set to expire on March 18th, 2022. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, the first place you want to start is to have the Federal Register that covers nationwide permits. This is a toolbox item, and it's kind of long, but if you go to that page indicated 1983 and 124, that's where the activities start. The district engineers have the authority to determine if an activity complies with the terms and conditions of a nationwide permit. The district engineer is the Corps' project manager and the reviewer of approval of the authorization. Next slide, please. This is a list of the current 2017 nationwide permits. And if you notice, nationwide permit 26 is reserved. That used to be for headwaters and isolated wetlands. And in the late 90s, that was misused. There was large amounts of impacts being placed in the aquatic environment. So the Corps limited the use of the nationwide permit 26, and finally they rescinded it under the 2002 nationwide permits when they were issued. And just to give you an example of what I previously mentioned. Next slide. And these two, nationwide permit 53 and 54, was the two activities that were added with the 2017 nationwide permits. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the general conditions. To qualify for nationwide permit authorization, applicants must comply with the applicable general condition for an activity. And you'll see as you go through, you have the most familiar ones, endangered species, mitigation, and there's some others here that might apply to your activity. Next slide, please. These are the regional conditions. The nationwide permits are further, in this case, it's Jacksonville District applies the regional conditions because Florida is much different than other parts of the country. So that's the reason the regional conditions are applied. And if you'll notice, I'm going to point this out, pre-construction notification threshold in this column tells you to go to the regional conditions in the right-hand column, and you go down and in most cases, I'm going to tell you 99.9% of the nationwide permits are going to require a pre-construction notification, which is basically an application that Cynthia had covered. Next slide, please. And this is the requirement to submit a pre-construction notification, as I just mentioned. It goes through a review process to determine if the activity meets the minimal adverse impacts, and then verification of that activity would follow. And where would you look to determine if PCN is required? Next slide. The activity itself, in this case, at the end notification, it'll tell you that if you permittee must submit a pre-construction notification, or it could be in the general condition, which is in the same federal regulation. And it'll tell you that non-federal permittees must submit a pre-construction notification to the district engineer. And these regional conditions, that's another toolbox item. And you can find that link also in the source book that we referenced before. Next slide. Now I'm going to go through some of the most used nationwide permits for transportation projects. And nationwide permit 3, if you have a structure or field, a serviceable structure or field, and this is if it was previously permitted or if it was something that was built prior to 1972 when the Clean Water Act was first published, those structures would be grandfathered in. And what you're seeing here, if nationwide permit 3 is useful for culvert replacements or culvert repairs, or if you've got bridges where you have, for instance, a 2-lane bridge being replaced by a 2-lane bridge. And if you have the picture on the bottom is a picture. It's where a bridge was replaced, and it was replaced along the existing bridge because the existing bridge was going to use as a temporary bypass while the new bridge was being constructed. But it was a 2-lane bridge, and the design standards allowed it to add a pedestrian bike pathway alongside the new 2 lanes. This was a total of 1 acre of permanent impacts, and we also had 0.14 acres of estuarine salt marsh wetlands impact. And we just consulted informally with the National Marine Fisheries on the impacts of the essential fish habitat and got concurrence with the mitigation proposal. So it does come in handy if for instance, a nationwide 14, the field might exceed the threshold for a 14. A 3 can be used also. Next slide, please. Survey activities, most used by in transportation for core sampling. This one used to be the one that you could get by without a pre-construction notification until the 2017 nationwide permits were issued, and there's a requirement to submit a PCN for manatees, which, and I would say I said before, 99.9% of the nationwide permits would require pre-construction notification, but the 0.1% that might be some type of inland waterway in Florida where you meet all the conditions, but it's very rare these days. Next slide. Nationwide permit 12, we mainly use those for the intelligence transportation systems, the laying of the utility lines, and could be used for if you have some trenching, if you're trenching in, replacing utility lines or lines. And currently, Nationwide 12 is in litigation, but the headquarters guidance is that it can be used for qualifying activities other than oil and gas related projects. Next slide, please. Nationwide permit 13 for bank stabilization, and this applies to anything below the ordinary high water line or the high tide line, this tidal waterway, and adding riprap or scour protection. And this might not fit under a nationwide 14, but as you can see there, it gives you some linear feet, less than 500 linear feet or less than 1 cubic yard per running foot, and those activities can be waived. But that's a good, and that's interchangeable, that sometimes that you can look at your project and it might be able to fit under a nationwide permit 13. Next slide, please. Nationwide 14, this is the bread and butter for transportation projects. Like I had previously mentioned, it gives you some flexibility with a nationwide permit 3 or nationwide permit 13, and for other minor impacts such as sidewalks, culverts, etc. Next slide, please. Nationwide 23, approved categorical exclusions. And this also can be found under the Nationwide 23 in our source book. It'll take you to the regulatory guidance letter that is still current, but it's another toolbox item to put in your toolbox. It basically approved headquarters USACE for 3 federal agencies, was the Bureau of Land Management, Federal Highways, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Attachment 2 is what you want to examine and put it in your toolbox for that. And the links within our source book can take you to that information. It's attached to the regulatory guidance letter. But you're still looking at, minimal impacts to aquatic environment, but you might have something that just exceeds some of the other nationwide's permits, and might be a good tool for you to use. Let's see, next slide. There's 2 paragraphs that's applicable to the federal highway or the FDOT. These are the activities specifically allowed under subparagraph 3, which, we have the multi-use paths, and I've used a couple for the pathways, and used a few for the upgrades to rest areas. Next slide. Paragraph D, all the activities under paragraph D are authorized. So as you can see, you got several different types of activities listed there. You might research it and see that something might fit. And with all of this stuff that I'm saying, you can still reach out to your core FDOT project manager and have a discussion saying, hey, this is what we're looking at. This might fit. What do you think? And get some advice on that as you're preparing to submit for your application. Next slide. Just a continuation of the 3 more activities under the subparagraph D. Nationwide 27, aquatic habitat restoration. Use this one quite a bit. These pictures here was for a stream restoration project, and also for wetland restorations. And this was before the planning had occurred. This was the initial, just getting the waterway straightened out. We also recently just completed a mangrove restoration and enhancement project using the Nationwide 27. It can be used for permanently responsible offsite mitigation areas, especially in this case where these pictures, there's no mitigation bank service area. And with the mangrove mitigation, there's a lack of that type of resource available. So we're able to use this. You might have some other opportunities that might fit under Nationwide 27. Next slide. Here are some other common but less used nationwide permits for transportation projects. I've used, I think, almost all of these, but they're very seldomly used, but they are there in case you need them. Next slide. And special conditions, we add those to the verification letters, and it's either laid out in the general conditions or the regional conditions, but we have specific special conditions that we add to the verification. Next slide. Expiration of the 2017 nationwide permits, not till 18 March 2022. But as we close in on that, you can prepare by getting your list ready of nationwide permits that will require renewal. reissue. We have a expedited review process for the re-verification of the nationwide permits once the 2022 nationwide permits are finalized. Next slide. Okay, that does it for nationwide permits. I will now be followed by Mark Tamblin for regional general permits. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, FDOT. I wanted to cover my general permit, which is SAJ 92. Can I have the next slide, please? This permit recently expired, and we're in the process of reauthorizing it right now. We are waiting for some concurrence from the Coastal Zone Management, from DEP, from the Seminole Tribe, and looking to move forward with getting it reauthorized sometime within the year. With everything that's happening right now, it's been moved back a little bit, and we don't have a specific date when it is going to be reauthorized. Next slide, please. Some of the modifications that are taking place within the SAJ 92 are, we've had some new updated reporting formats, commencement notifications, and also as-built certification forms. We've also, since this permit is specifically for linear transportation projects, we've tried to modify it to include tidal waters. Along with that, since there would be tidal waters within the Jacksonville district, we'd be looking at JAXBO for programmatic biological opinion on things. We've also modified a segment of a measurement within the project or permit itself, and that permit would allow 5 acres of impact within a mile. Next slide, please. Along with that in mind, as far as the impacts per mile, you might ask, how does it qualify for that? And how would someone else be able to have those impacts within this permit? This permit, at one point in time, did not cover Monroe County, and that's part of the modifications as well too. It's now going to cover all of the state of Florida for impacts with linear transportation projects. But next slide, please. Primarily, the 5 acres per mile is because these projects have gone through extensive research, through EDTM, through PDE studies, and most all of the modifications and improvements have been made by other agencies that have reviewed these projects within 5 years of when they're going to be permitted. One of the terms that we have is it's pretty much throughout the permitting process is submitting a PCN, normally a 4345 form with the application, and follow all the procedures that were explained in the past two presenters. Again, the EDTM number needs to be in that permit application, and if there is any kind of a PD&E study as well, it will help move things along and keep it qualified within that permit. The dredge and fill, like I mentioned, the dredge and fill impacts are up to 5 acres per mile within that application. The application does require compensatory mitigation for any unavoidable impacts. And the normal authorities within that permit would be Section 404 and Section 10. Next slide, please. These are two typical types of projects that would you'd encounter with SAJ 92. Non-capacity projects, safety improvements, maintenance, bike lanes, sidewalk additions, which are, basically a smaller version. And then the capacity projects, which would be new interchanges, new intersections to some of the continuous roadways that are already there, but just providing additional maximum number of vehicles per those travel lanes. Next slide, please. These are some of the other terms and conditions within SAG 92. It does not authorize stream flow channelization or bank-to-bank filling or culverting any greater than 300 linear feet, or any type of natural stream systems that are there. The activities cannot increase the risk of flooding or negatively impact hydrological flow from any kind of stream or water quality areas. It does not authorize a severance or a separation of connections with upstream or downstream water flows to natural water bodies. And it does not authorize construction of new alignment. Next slide. The projects normally within DOT would primarily be federally funded. And with that allowance, DOT is a lead agency. And we would really request that you send everything that you have, Section 7, Section 106, ESA, EFH, anything that you have, which might have a biological opinion from Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, SHPO, any of that information is great to have to continue the process moving forward with the permit. Next slide. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Virginia King or Andy Kozlowskis. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Folks, we've got a special guest. Virginia King is our 408 coordinator at the Corps. We've noticed an uptick in more robust Section 408 evaluations, and FDOT actually has a funding agreement specifically for 408 reviews. So she's going to provide some valuable information on the 408 process. So thank you, Virginia.
Thanks, Andy. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so as Andy mentioned, I'm the Section 408 coordinator in SAJ, in particular with catering to the regulatory program and incoming projects that may require 408, but certainly require a regulatory permit. So today, very general overview, essentially what is 408 in general, when should an applicant apply for 408 review, and in general, how does one do that? So to start off, essentially the Corps has constructed several civil works federal water resource projects across the nation. Some of those, of course, are located in populated areas. In SAJ, that's very true in South Florida. And over time, entities may need to alter these projects or install non-federal project features. So as established in Section 14 of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, which is codified as Section 408, Congress mandated that the Corps must approve any proposed alterations of a federal project that's coming in from a non-federal entity, or excuse me, any entity that's not the Corps. So that could be a non-federal entity or a federal entity. Permission or approval under Section 408 is essentially a determination that the proposed work is not injurious to the public interest, and it will not impair the usefulness of the federal project as designed. And in Jacksonville District, Section 408 reviews and approvals are essentially delegated to our engineering division. So next question we get a lot is, when do I need a Section 408 approval? And in SAJ civil works boundaries, typically we have two major types of civil works projects. Of course, our federal flood control projects such as the CNSF flood control project, several federal levees, Herbert Hoover Dike, just to name a couple. And the other major category of federal projects, if you will, are federal navigation projects. So typically shallow draft channels such as the Intercoastal Waterway and the Okeechobee Waterway. And of course, deep draft navigation projects, which is typically inlets and ports. And while any proposed action in any kind of federal project requires a 408 review based on the type of project and whether the project has a non-federal sponsor, it can affect how one initiates the 408 review process. So next slide, please. Okay, so I figured we'd start off with federal flood control projects. I've just provided a few images, some of the main federal projects that folks run into with permitting issues. Of course, the CNSF project, Herbert Hoover Dike is also pictured, and then I just grabbed a quick aerial of some of our SERP projects in South Florida associated with Everglades restoration. So for these types of projects, typically any alteration or work anywhere within the federal project footprint. So that could be on a levee, it could be within a canal, it could be something that's within a SDA or other federal project. That's going to trigger a 408 review. However, for the CNSF system, that project has a non-federal sponsor in the South Florida Water Management District. And as non-federal sponsor, it is their role to initiate the 408 review. So we can go to the next slide on this one. Okay, so again, just wanted to pull out the CNSF project. Essentially, it's the several miles and miles of canals and levees and other water control structures in South Florida. And again, if you have a project that is located anywhere within a canal, within a right-of-way, you know, anything of that nature, that's something that our engineering division is going to want to look at from a 408 perspective to ensure that it's not affecting how the federal project was designed to operate. Again, the South Florida Water Management District is a non-federal sponsor we work with quite a lot just because of the extensive nature of this project. And for any questions on whether the district will initiate their 408 process through the right-of-way permitting program, I just wanted to provide Terry Swartz's point of contact here for everyone. You know, she's very knowledgeable, and essentially she is kind of like my counterpart in the Water Management District as far as processing incoming projects and determining if a 408 needs to be required and submitted to our engineering division. Okay, next slide. All right, so like I said, another kind of major federal project that permit activities impact, if you will, quite a lot are federal navigation projects. So I have pictured over on the left side here, it's St. Lucie area. So we have the St. Lucie Inlet, which is a deep draft federal navigation project. We also have the Okeechobee Waterway and the Intercoastal Waterway. And then on the other side here on the right, we have Port Everglades and the Intercoastal Waterway. So again, there are different kinds of federal nav projects. You typically have your shallow draft projects like the OWW and IWW, and then these deep draft federal projects, if you will. Now, when we're looking at these with regard to 408, typically anything within 62.5 feet of the shallow draft federal nav channels, and that's based on the near design edge or the side slopes of the channel itself, that's going to trigger the 408 review. And the concept here is, you know, if you want to look at the picture on the left, if someone was, say, putting riprap on the bridge in the northern part of the picture, on the edges outside of the federal navigation channel, that's not going to affect the federal project itself. So, you know, there are setback requirements when we're talking about those shallow draft channels that trigger 408. When we're talking about the deep draft nav channels and inlets, just because of the nature of the project and the reality that several entities are involved on a civil works side, anything anywhere near these is going to require a 408 review. And I just wanted to add too that, typically navigation projects, are all going to be, the Section 408 is going to be initiated internally through the regulatory permitting process. And that's going to require an internal coordination both with our navigation section and our engineering division. And like I said, typically also civil works and planning will get involved. But again, all internal, so you would come right to regulatory for impacts to these projects. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we also wanted to just touch base really quick on some common activities that typically require Section 408 review. Obviously, subaqueous utility and transmission lines that are going through federal flood control channels or ICW or any kind of deep draft nav channel. Those are all going to require an assessment from a 408 perspective. And I won't go through all this criteria today, just for the sake of time, but I did want to let folks know that this criteria is specifically detailed in Regional General Permit SAJ 14 in Special Condition number 28. Typically, these projects will still need to be looked at by Engineering Division, but just to give folks some design criteria to start with for when you're initiating your application, what engineering is usually looking for as just a general guideline on setbacks, both vertical and horizontal from federal channels or flood control channels. So next slide, please. Okay, so here I've just provided a visual example, if you will, of some plan drawings for a subaqueous line installed via horizontal directional drill method. And this is going to be in a CNSF canal. So if you recall from a couple of slides back, since the South Florida Water Management District is the non-federal sponsor for the CNSF project, in this example, you would initiate the Section 408 review through the South Florida Water Management District. And that would be done again through their right-of-way permitting program. So again, I just wanted to show this really quick to show an example of drawings. Here from a regulatory perspective, we can clearly see where your staging area is, where the entry and exit pits for the HDD are, where are we in relation to the federal project, and of course, that design criteria that I kind of touched on in RGP SAJ 14, that's all clearly, in very detail illustrated here. So again, just an example we wanted to provide for a CNSF canal. Next slide, please. Okay, and then I wanted to provide another example I had for a crossing of a shallow draft channel. So this is going through the Intercoastal Waterway. Again, visually, this is very similar. It's still getting at where your entry and exit points. And then it has a nice cross section that illustrates how deep you are from the federal channel and any setbacks, where your line's specifically going. This is all information that our engineering division likes to see when they receive an application. So they have an understanding of not just where your project is, but where it is in relation to the federal project, which in this case is the Intercoastal Waterway. And just as a quick reminder too, so here we are in a shallow draft channel. So this is going to be submitted directly through regulatory through the permitting process. You would not go to the Water Management District on this one. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so another activity that I understand you guys encounter a lot is the placement of shoreline stabilization or scour prevention. I know this topic in particular has come up a lot recently on some DOT projects in South Florida. And I just wanted to, provide a very general overview that when you're submitting these types of projects, it's really, the 408 initiation is really triggered off of where the project is located and the proximity of the material to the federal project. So here I have a lovely aerial of Miami. So we have South Beach and Miami Harbor, downtown Miami. And there are a lot of federal projects in this little area. So you have C4, 5, and 6 canals, which are all part of the CNSF flood control project. So everyone should be triggering in their mind that those would go to the South Florida Water Management District to initiate the 408 review. And that would be if scour materials placed anywhere in those canals. As far as the Miami River and the ICW, or the IWW, excuse me, those are both shallow draft channels. So anything that would be within the 62.5-foot setback of those from the channel itself would require a Section 408 review, both submitted through Regulatory Division. Obviously, since the Miami River is so narrow, pretty much everything in there is going to require a 408 review. So just of note. And then again, we have Miami Harbor here, which is a deep draft federal project. So anything anywhere near that is going to require a 408 review. So that's all I have. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you, Virginia. And then Sue Maxwell is gonna take home with USACE efficiencies for in-processing applications.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry about that. I had the microphone turned off, but eventually it came back on. The first thing I'd like to talk about is our engineering form, which can be found at our source book. All our applications are emailed to the CorJax reg-fdot@usace.army.mil. Sometimes the application ends up at the project manager's email, and they have to forward them to me. So if you could just send everything to our general mailbox. And the applications themselves should be in a separate document and not embedded in a 600-page document, because it takes me a long time to find it. It really slows the process down. If you have attachments to the applications, you can send me an email request for an invitation, and I can send you an invitation to send the attachments to our RMFT file transfer. And I have the address located here. The naming convention, we normally name it FDOT-3- and then the FPN number, which is very important, because when I go into our database, I look for that FPM number to see if there are any duplicates, and that saves time as well. Okay, as the applicant, if you could put your district name plus your name. A lot of times I either get a name but no district number, or a district number and no name. So that would be very helpful. And if you could identify the specific nationwide permit, or if it's an IP. So if it's a nationwide 14 IP, that would be very helpful as well. I need all previous permit numbers, and that helps with the duplication search as well. And I use the SharePoint. It's a valuable tool for tracking the core workload. And I run weekly reports, and it's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. We had one question in the question chat box, and that was whether you can get a copy of the presentation. And Two is going to send everybody, all the attendees, a copy of it. So you will be able to get a copy of it. And Two, I don't know if we have time for questions, but we'd be happy to take any at this time.
Sure. I know some folks have already signed off because I'm sure they had other meetings that they had to attend to at 4 o'clock, but we can still continue to record. And for those who are still here, we can take your questions at this time. Please use the chat box, and we can go through them one by one. Andy, it looks like we do have one question currently in the question box.
Yes, and I think that was the one that I see is, will today's presentation be emailed to the participants?
There is one more question regarding the 408, and the question is, how do Terry and Beverly Miller interact at South Florida Water Management District? And Virginia, I just unmuted you in case you might have the answer for that.
That might be a better question for Terry. I would assume that Beverly Miller is a right-of-way personnel, perhaps, that processes incoming applications, but I'm not sure. Typically, I just coordinate with Terry, but essentially, when a right-of-way application comes in, it goes through Terry to determine if it's in the CNSF and if she needs to submit the 408 package directly to the Corps through our engineering division. And I in regulatory am here to see if we have an active application as well to try and do that matching between our two agencies. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I guess my best recommendation would be to ask the staff at the Water Management District regarding their internal coordination.
Thanks, Virginia. See, I see another question. Trying to get to it just a second. Is the 408 federal project layer available to the public? It would help to know when a project might be in conflict with a 408 project. And Virginia, I'm assuming you have an answer for that.
Sure. So that is a wonderful question. And if you can believe it, we currently do not have an overarching Google Earth or ArcGIS layer per se that illustrates where every single federal project is located at. Most of the things we have are either things from online resources like the National Levee Database or historic maps that we can utilize. Also, the South Florida Water Management District does have a detailed infrastructure map that's on their website. That's very helpful, that you can print out or have a nice PDF version to zoom in on some of the more detailed canals. But I will say that the Corps currently is working on developing this exact layer so that we can see where every single project specifically is located. Like I said, right now, it's just not something that's been funded, but it's in the process of being funded and in the process of being worked on.
Perfect. Thank you, Virginia. And the next question is, I think you may have answered that, but the next question is, can we have a copy of the clear CNSF map for 408? And I think Virginia, as she said, the Corps is currently working on it. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Virginia?
Yeah, like I said, the best map that's all inclusive, if you will, is that South Florida Water Management District infrastructure map that's on their website that they regularly update. It's still not an interactive GIS layer. It's a PDF, but it at least gets you an understanding of if you're in the ballpark of a canal or structure. And again, if you're kind of unsure, or am I upstream of a structure that terminates it or downstream of a structure, Terry is certainly a wonderful point of contact to determine who needs to trigger the 408 on that.
Thanks, Virginia. It looks like we have one more question. If the Water Management District is unable to sponsor, how should FDOT proceed? Signatures are required for the Section 408, which is needed to get the 404 permit.
So I'm not sure what is meant by if they're not able to sponsor. So I guess I'll just give a quick overview. So the Water Management District is the non-federal sponsor for that entire CNSF project as a whole. So if your proposed work is in those boundaries, then they will initiate the 408. That is one of their roles as the non-federal sponsor. If, however, you are outside of the CNSF in some other federal project, whether it's a levee or a restoration project or a water resource project or, of course, a navigation project, that needs to be submitted directly to your, it'll be submitted directly through the RD permitting process. This is a relatively new process. We've worked in internal SOP that is days from signature to finalize all this, but that is still the appropriate protocol that when the South Florida Water Management District isn't involved, or any other non-federal sponsor, certainly St. John's or Southwest Florida can initiate as well. But it should be coming in through regulatory. I hope that answered the question. And I guess the only other thing I can say is that there are situations where historically I've seen DOTs submit the 408 directly through a CFA. And that's more of a unique situation where DOT would essentially trigger the 408 themselves through that funding agreement.
Perfect. Thanks, Virginia. Let's see, there's one more question. For a project which FDOT believes is exempt from 408, can South Florida Water Management District provide a letter indicating their concurrence, or what would be helpful to the Corps to demonstrate exemption?
So anything in writing is wonderful, emails, letters. Essentially, if it's a project, I know we've had projects say where it's a minor maintenance activity, such as replacing a hinge on a culvert, more of a cosmetic thing that doesn't affect how the federal project is designed to operate, but it's something that needs to be done. An email will suffice. That can be submitted to either your regulatory project manager or anyone else who's inquiring about 408. There are cases where if the South Florida Water Management District has said, oh, we don't believe a 408 is required, at the end of the day, as I mentioned in my presentation, the determining factor is our engineering division up in Jacksonville. So if they're not agreeing, then that would likely trigger us to have a sit-down meeting to understand why folks aren't agreeing. And that's, again, something that we do on a regular basis. So if you're running into that on a project, just you can contact me and we'll see if we can work it out.
Perfect. Thank you, Virginia. As of right now, I don't see any more questions. One more question just popped in. Can Virginia provide her contact information?
Sure. Do you guys, I guess I'll just go ahead and provide my email. So it is Virginia, like the state, .e.king at USACE.army.mil.
Perfect. Thank you. Andy, I think that's the last question we have. We can wait another couple of minutes to see if anything else comes in. Are there any last remarks?
No, that's good timing because the storm here just knocked out my internet. So luckily I was on the phone. No, I just appreciate everybody for coming, and you can definitely reach out to any of us that presented here today with any other questions as you have previously. So thanks again.
All right, and I want to express my thanks to the Army Corps team for putting this together. Lots of good information, a good overview of the Army Corps process and how you engage with FDOT. Appreciate all of your help and your work in getting this together. For all those who are still on the line, we will have this recording made available. Hopefully once it can convert into something that is postable onto our OEM website. And also the presentation, the PowerPoint will be made available as well. I'm not sure exactly how to email this to all attendees, but we'll find a way. But appreciate everyone's time today. And once again, thank you to the core presenters. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.